Thank you so much. So today, my two children are back home in Ohio in the United States, and this is their last day of school before the summer. And I am here instead, but I told them I would take a picture of you all smiling and cheering for them. Is that okay? Okay, so with all of your might, please cheer for my children. On 3, 2, 1. Thank you. All right, thank you. All right. They will appreciate that. So again, my name is Ben Callahan. I'm the president of Sparkbox. We are based in the States. There's about 55 of us, and our job is to partner with complex organizations to create user-driven web experiences. I will give you lots of ways to connect with me, although my machine is not clicking here. Can we? I don't know. One moment, please. Doesn't seem to advance. Oh, now it's going, of course. Backwards is this?
Right, no, on the red.
Yes, and can I go back with this? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so, sorry. Lots of ways to connect with me. I love to discuss these things, but I wanted to give you this information. That's my email address. You can send me a note anytime. Happy to find time to chat with you. Also, my Twitter account, so my direct messages are open there. I would love to speak with you there. And I made a little form, this little bit.ly link, which you can go to fill out to ask questions or to give me feedback on the presentation or on the model. I am a researcher at heart, and so I'm always gathering information from folks. So if you have things to share, I would love to hear those from you, okay? Okay. And so I'll start with a quick story. So it was about, I think, 8 years ago, my company, Sparkbox, was hired by a very large retailer, online e-commerce. And they have many brands, and they sell lots of products online every year, billions and billions of US dollars worth of product. And this was 8-ish years ago, and it was sort of a heyday for responsive web design. And their product detail page, the one single template where you make a buying decision, right? This one page was still being served in 2 different ways, one to desktop computers and one to mobile devices. And they wanted to redesign this single page to be responsive. And so they hired our company to come, and we helped alongside their team. They have large teams, and we worked with them over the course of an entire year to redesign, to test, to build, and iterate on this single template. And at the end of that year, we made that live, went to production. It was very successful for them. The relationship that we built with them was very strong. And when we were finishing that project up, we were looking ahead as well at all of the work that still needed to be done. You know, they wanted to go backwards. And so from the product detail page, usually you arrive there from a listing page of some kind. You've done a search or so a category page, something like this. And so we started to look at the work that we would need to do on that category page, and we said, actually, we've got a lot of work that we did for the product detail page that we think we could reuse for your category page. And so we had worked in a very systematic way. We weren't hired to build a design system for them, but we had sort of started one. And so we proposed to them that perhaps we could take the work we had already done, spend a little bit of time refactoring that work, and turn it into a system which would help us to be able to build the rest of their flow out much quicker. And they loved the idea, and so we spent another year or so working on both the design system, the beginning of a design system, and on their category listing page. And the project was going really well, and it was about a year after we had started that second phase, and I got a phone call from our project manager. And they had just gotten a phone call from our client, and that client said, stop all of your work. And this was a big deal for us because, 2 years worth of work on a single template with a very large client, we're a small company, it was a little bit scary. And this was the moment, I think, that I realized I needed to better understand design systems, and we started down this journey of research. And so since 2018, we have been doing industry surveys where we ask lots of questions. Hopefully, maybe some of you have even seen these and filled these out. This image that you see is the homepage from last year's survey results. We have closed our survey for this year, and the results will be coming out in 1 or 2 weeks. So if you're interested in receiving the results on our design system survey for 2022, you can follow Here Sparkbox on Twitter, or again, fill out that little form, and I'll make sure you get that site when we release those details. In addition to this research, as preparation for it every year, I do hundreds of interviews just with people all over the world who are doing design systems. And so I've learned a lot just from talking with people to try and make sure that our surveys are staying relevant. And in addition to that, of course, we do lots of work. We work with big organizations to help them with their design systems. So all of what I share with you today is coming from our experience doing the research, lots of interviews, and doing the work on a daily basis. And I want to talk to you about the maturity model, which is what the title of the talk is. But before we do that, I have realized something in our consulting, which is that no matter the size of an organization, no matter how long they've had design systems, everybody we talk to inside the companies we work with has a different understanding of what a design system is. Perhaps you've run into this if you're working with a design system inside your companies. And so I want to offer just a little bit of context and a short excerpt on the anatomy of a design system to make sure that at least today we're all talking about the same thing, okay? So defining a design system has to start with context, and the way that I like to think about that is that every organization is trying to connect their brand with an audience. And they do that in a lot of different ways. Sometimes they print things and you get them in your mail. Sometimes they create amazing in-store experiences. Sometimes they do advertising and you hear them perhaps on a podcast or in a TV show somewhere. And almost every organization today has a major touch point between their brand and their audience, which is a digital experience. And that's what we're here to talk about today, products, digital products. These could be websites or native applications or even a kiosk perhaps in a store. And a design system's role in all of this is that it sits between the brand and those digital experiences that we are hoping to offer and to connect with our audiences. This is really important, I think, to talk about because it helps us to understand the inputs and the outputs of a design system. The input being the brand, which should be well established, and there should be guidelines and things that you can follow, and the output being whatever is needed for your teams to build really good digital experiences. Is this all making sense so far? Yes? Okay, all right, thank you. So let's talk now a little bit about what makes up this design system. I like to say that design systems start with a foundations layer, and this is a subset of the organization's brand, and it's the things that we use to design and develop digital interfaces. So there's lots of examples that may be, I'll just put a few on screen, of the kinds of things that you would have in a foundations layer of your design system. So lots of things like illustration guidelines and sound guidelines, voice and tone, all of these kinds of things, okay? And from this, we can then take those foundational concepts and we can define some of those as tokens. And so we create a tokens layer which sits on top of those foundations. And this tokens layer, it's really about looking at the individual design decisions and codifying those. And when I say codify, I simply mean taking a single decision, perhaps a color, giving it a name and a value. And then we can use those tokens throughout all of our products to create much more consistency, to make it easy to update those things, and also to support lots of different platforms, like perhaps native and web. Once we have tokens defined, there's lots of different things you can tokenize as well, as you can see. Things like color and spacing and elevation and opacity, many things. And once we have those defined, we can create core systems. And the core systems layer is about taking those tokens and figuring out how they work together. And so core systems consist of things like, they're like building blocks kind of for the rest of the components. One way to think about it is that if we codify a single design decision, that's a token. If we codify how those design decisions work together, that's a core system. So it may be things like iconography or layout and grid systems, theming systems, these kinds of examples. Now, with these three innermost layers defined, we call this the fundamental layers. And this is really, if you are on a design systems team, these are the things that you're should be mostly focused on, especially early in the maturity of your design system. And it's really what everything else will be built on. Now, once we have those fundamental layers defined, we can create what most people think of when they think of a design system, which is components. And so this is the fourth layer, and it really contains the reusable pieces of your interface. So it can be very simple, like a button. It can be very complex, like an entire navigation. You can nest components to create patterns. And really the way this model works is that design system teams start at the center and work out, and all of your subscribers will start on the outside and work in, okay? Now, a few examples of the kinds of things you might see as components here, notifications, text inputs, breadcrumbs, you name it, tons and tons of things. Pretty much every documentation site you go to, there will be a section called components, and you'll just see lists of these. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Now, this model is very conceptual, so in order to make it a little bit more tangible, we also talk about three different parts that each layer has. And those parts are assets, processes, and documentation. So very quickly, I'll describe these, and then we'll move into the model. So when we talk about assets, what we're talking about is the tangible things that make each of these layers very usable. So an example here might be at the foundations layer. You might have some logo files. Those are assets that are related to the foundation of your organization. At the tokens layer, you might have CSS primitive color tokens. So this would be a CSS file that has some of those color variables defined for you. Okay, these are just single examples, but there are many of each of these layers. At the core systems layer, you might have some SAS mix-ins to help with layout, right? So this is, again, multiple design decisions being combined to help you solve a common interface problem, layout. And then at that components layer, you may have an actual button component, a Figma file that represents that button. So these are very tangible things. And of course, there's much more than just these assets, right? And so the next part of every layer is processes. And this is the stuff that we have to talk about that defines how we as humans interact with the system and with each other. And a few examples here would be something like communication, governance, deprecation, extension of the system. These are kind of the primary categories that we tend to need processes around. A few more specific examples would be like at the foundations layer, because our design system is built from a brand, what happens if the brand changes, right? So we need a process that defines how the design system team will interact with the brand team in that scenario. At the tokens layer, an example might be a process for how we adjust when a token needs to be modified, right? That can ripple through an entire design system, so we have to be careful, and we have to have some process defined around that. At the core systems layer, that might be something like deprecating an old grid system in favor of something new. And at the components layer, perhaps accepting modifications of a component from one of your subscribers. So again, just thinking about this as the processes, the way that we interact with the system. And you're not going to have all of these defined early on, right? These will evolve over time. And then the final part is documentation. And documentation is really about explaining why something is the way it is, but also offering a breakdown of the pieces and parts and when and how and why to use a specific piece. And so some examples here might be a point of view on color at the foundations layer. And I've pulled a few screenshots from IBM's design system documentation site. So here's where they talk about their point of view on color. So this is from Carbon, again, IBM's system. So again, the documentation here is about offering why is it that we think the way we do, and giving folks that basic understanding. At the tokens layer, you might have an explanation on how to name tokens. Tokens are notoriously difficult to come up with good names for, and so you do need good documentation around this. So again, from Carbon, here's an example of them talking about the meaning of the names of their tokens and how you can use those names to really actually understand what that token is. At the core systems layer, it might be information on how to use a theming system. And again, from Carbon, here's an example of them explaining how theming works using their design system. And at the components layer, it perhaps could be the breakdown of a specific component. And the example I have here is, again, from Carbon, just showing how they diagram out every piece and part of a button. And so this documentation is supposed to be very informative, and not just how to use a thing, but giving your teams an understanding of why. I think that's really critical with the documentation. Okay. So altogether, this gives us a way to talk about design systems and to know that we actually mean the same things when we use these words. Now, I want to use that shared understanding that we have to talk with you about the way that design systems mature. And so I have 4 more concepts to share with you. Those are the 4 stages of maturity. So we'll talk about how design systems mature. I have one concept called the origin story of a design system, which actually greatly impacts how your system moves through those stages. And then 2 frameworks, one which just gives you very simple instruction on how to mature in a healthy way, and one that offers some insights into how to stay stable in the midst of a lot of change. So let's dive into the 4 stages. So the first stage we just call building version 1. It's very simple. This is everything in your work that you need to do to get that very first release live. The decisions that you make here are going to have a big impact on how your system matures. And this stage can look very different depending on the origin story, which we'll cover here in a moment. Remember, the key here is to dig into the foundations of your brand, right? You have to start with that core brand information in order to build a foundation that's going to be stable for your system. And I would say that the things to keep in mind here I have along the bottom of this slide. Just you're focused really on discovering the right scope for your first version, finding partners inside the organization, and building something that will actually be valuable for your subscribers. Which leads us to stage 2, which is essentially, we call it growing adoption. And this is basically you transition to stage 2 as soon as you're starting to talk to folks about using the system, right? You have something for them to subscribe to, and now you're saying, hey, I think you should use this. And pretty much everybody that I've spoken with who releases a design system immediately is curious, is anybody else going to find this valuable? And so that's kind of what's happening here. Really this stage is about learning how to support those subscribers, learning how to also be a salesperson, which probably none of us signed up to do, but it is part of the work of design systems. And once you reach a critical mass of adoption, you kind of move into stage 3. The real focus here is making your design system easy to adopt and obvious to adopt. In other words, make it something your product teams couldn't imagine doing their job without. And that's how you make adoption easy. Now, once you reach that critical mass of folks using the system, we transition to stage 3, which we call surviving the teenage years. And if you have children, you probably understand why this phrase makes sense. This comes with an entirely new set of challenges. You have a lot of folks using the system now, right? You have grown adoption. What happens is you'll discover people try to do things with your design system that you never imagined they would. And so you have lots of different ideas coming to you, feature requests, right? We think it should work this way, or bugs, we found this and it doesn't meet the need that we have, or people wanting to change, extend the system in some way. And so you are in this stage realizing that your design system actually is a product, and you have users, and you have to support those users and build relationships with them. And so this is a very critical stage. And the other big thing that happens here is that in order to get this far, somebody on your design systems team has had to go to leadership probably and say, hey, we think a design system would help, and here's why. Here, we're going to make you a few promises about what this system will do. And now that leadership is coming back to you and saying, hey, you promised me it would do this. Show me that it's doing it. And so you have to make those promises, right, come true. And so this is a difficult stage. A lot of organizations at this stage are really leaning heavily on contribution from their product teams and governing how those contributions will be accepted. This stage is really about building that product team and the product mindset. And then stage 4 is we call evolving a healthy product. This is when your system really is a fully realized product. It's your focus kind of shifts more towards sustainability and growth. And we see really highly evolved engagement with subscribers, like very interesting communication, processes and things in place. And your focus is on stabilizing your system in the midst of a lot of change. And really, it's about maturing here, right? It's about maturing into stable leadership. Stage 4 design systems are at the table for big decisions inside of organizations. They are driving design tooling. They're driving technology tooling in some cases. They're not reactive. They're very proactive. Now, again, every organization has different experiences with these 4 stages. I think when we first started doing this research, I couldn't see the patterns. I honestly thought there is no single way that systems mature. And then I realized, I found this one other idea, which is the concept of origin stories, which actually has a tremendous impact on how they mature. And it helped me to sort of see these patterns in a different way. So there's 2 primary origin stories, the first of which we call top-down. And this means that your executive leadership was involved, aware, and very actively supportive of your first release. And the second origin story we call grassroots. And that means that the opposite. Your executive leadership was uninvolved, unaware, or unsupportive of that first release. So I want to share just quickly a little bit about the differences in these 2. So with a top-down origin story, there's a lot of visibility. Oftentimes you have an established budget, perhaps an entirely sanctioned team. You have top-down often has a broad scope because leadership understands many times the promises, and they want to see those promises throughout the organization. So they're looking for impact that is broad. And then, there's pressure, right? Because leadership is involved, and this might be an early thing for you all. They're going to expect results. Now, the opposite is true kind of the grassroots situation. And there's obviously less visibility. There probably is no budget. There's probably not a team. In fact, oftentimes grassroots design systems are 1 or 2 people on one team, just kind of over lunch working on some things, right? They're trying to solve their own problem because they maybe feel like, I'm tired of drawing this button over and over again, or I'm tired of coding this thing over and over again. I know it's going to be the same. Let's just start to put those things into a library so we can reuse things. And that slowly evolves into a system. These are more narrow in scope, right? Because it's an individual or 2, and they're solving very specific problems. And there's really no pressure because they're just doing it for themselves many times. Now, if you're looking at these 2 and you're thinking, well, I don't really fit either, that's actually pretty normal, right? These are very extreme ends of a spectrum. And so there's lots of different ways that your system can fit into this spectrum. Most systems evolve with some characteristics of both. I like to think about origin stories in this way. So at the beginning, in the early stages, that origin story has a big impact. These systems look very differently. But as your system matures, over time, they become more and more similar. And that's because a top-down system needs to get grassroots support as well, and a grassroots system needs to get top-down support, right? So over time, these systems become more and more alike, so that as a stage 4, you really couldn't tell, probably, what their origin story was. Now, the common path, the extreme paths are that if you start top-down, you're going to sort of become more like a grassroots system. And if you start grassroots, you're going to become more like a top-down. But there's lots of paths, as I mentioned. One thing that I hear consistently in interviews is something like this, that an individual, 1 or 2 folks on one team maybe decide to start doing these things. They build something really valuable, and leadership catches wind of this, and they think, we all need this. So all of a sudden, they're off that product team, they're on a design system team, they have a budget, and almost immediately they're trying to get other folks to use this, right? So this is a common story, and there's lots of other paths through. None of these are right, none of them are wrong. Okay, so we have the 4 stages, and we have the origin stories. Now let's talk about a very quick framework for how to mature, okay? So there's kind of 3 things that you have to do, no matter what stage you're at. And those are educate, engage, and evolve. When we talk about education, what we mean is like, this is more one way. This is kind of like, as the design system team, you're teaching, you're casting a vision, you're explaining why this is needed, why it's necessary, how it will help, what it will look like. And really, it is about casting that vision. It's about saying, hey, imagine the future state that we could have. Engaging is more along the lines of what you hopefully are doing with your externally facing products, right? Discovery work, where you're interviewing and learning from the people who you hope will use your system. Giving them a say in what you hope to accomplish, as well as recruiting them as potential folks to use it and to help you maintain it. And then evolution, of course, just means evolving the system, right? So continuously iterating and recognizing it will never actually be done. This is, of course, a team effort. It's very difficult to do it only with a dedicated team. Most of the time, we see folks bringing support in from their product teams as well. The most common problem that we see in our consulting with clients is that they're focusing on only 1 or 2 of these things, right? So they may have really good education, and they're always thinking about evolving the system, but they're actually not engaging with their partners. And this creates a gap in the maturity. And so they can move to stage 2, sometimes stage 3, but they're going to not be very stable there without that engagement and actually building relationships with the folks. And I wish I could tell you that there were 3 simple things to do for each of these, but it's much more a cycle, right? We talk about it as spiraling, where you're sort of just always doing all 3. And eventually what happens is you find yourself in the next stage. And it's also, we talk about this also as an additive framework. So what I mean by that is that the work that you do in stage 1 to educate, engage, and evolve, you have to continue doing once you're in stage 2, but there's a different set of things that you have to add to that work. So new types of education. A simple example would be, in stage 1, you don't actually have a system yet, right? So you're speaking sort of theoretically about why a system would be valuable. In stage 2, you have one, so you might be actually showing your system and teaching people how to use it, right? So that education, those tasks change, but you have to continue to do them as you move through. So the volume of work grows as your system matures. Okay. So now we have the 4 stages, we have the origin stories, and we have this little framework on how to mature. The last thing I want to share with you is this concept of system stability and how we help an organization to value the system over time and see it remain stable through lots of change. And I think that's part of it. Everything inside of our companies, in our industries, is just always changing. And I've listed a few here for you, but there are dozens, probably more, right? I can't tell you how many times we've been working with a client and their leadership changes and comes in and has just completely different ideas. And we have to start over to sort of like engage with that new leader that's just part of the work, right? And so recognizing that everything is always changing means we can actually start to think about what do we do to create stability in the midst of all of that change. So we've identified 3, we call them stabilizing forces. Those are authority, value, and tradition. I'll just explain each quickly. Authority, we mean leadership is actively supportive of the design system team and their goals. This really gives that design system team the confidence to carry out the work. And of course, the word active is very critical here, right? If you can't point to very specific things that your leadership is doing to support that team, it's probably not really getting this stabilizing force. Systems that have authority, you'll hear people, you'll see they have real budgets, they have dedicated teams, and their leadership is not only encouraging folks to use the system, but their leadership is encouraging teams to also help evolve it and help maintain it. When we talk about value, what we mean is that the system itself offers true value to the folks you hope will use it. In other words, it makes their jobs easier, right? And this is really important. It's going to solve real problems for them instead of creating new ones. The kinds of things that you see in design systems that have this stabilizer are very rapid adoption because it's the obvious choice for product teams. You see lots of feature requests, lots of bug reports, and you see that willingness to help evolve the system as well. And the third we call tradition. And this is really when the system has kind of become the way we build interfaces inside of your organization. Once that system has taken root, there's actually a lot of stabilizing power in the fact that it is the way we work. One sign that you might have this stabilizer is when folks from lots of different disciplines talk about your design system as the source of truth for interface work. Tradition's a little bit different because it really requires both authority and value over time to earn, and that's kind of how you get that tradition stabilizer. You have to remember that implementing a design system is literally asking everybody to change how they work. So this does take time to earn. Now, you can think about these 3 as like the legs of a tripod, right? Having a single one of them means you could fall in lots of directions, right? Having 2 means you're limited. You can only fall in one of 2 directions. And having all 3 is kind of what you need, and that's where you're stable. And forces changing around you will not impact the value and sustainability of your system. Now, it's not as simple as just getting them. You also have to maintain them. So there's this concept of regressions, right? Once you have earned them, you have to maintain them. And as an example, if you were to stop evolving your system, right, it's going to lose value over time. And so what would happen is you would find yourself in this sort of like upper right area where you have authority and tradition, but you're not offering value. And this is a place, it's a risky place to be because your teams are not going to feel trusted to do the work. They're being told to use something that doesn't offer them much value. And then another, just to sort of come back full circle, that the story that I told you at the beginning about that large retailer who, we got the call from and they said, stop work. Well, what had happened is we had built something really valuable. And we had lots of people using it. It had actually become the way they were building interfaces. So we had value and tradition, but we didn't have authority. We had never spoken to anyone in leadership about this. We just thought it was a smart way to work. And as soon as we started to call it design system, that budget got categorized into a single line item, and that number crossed some threshold in a spreadsheet that turned it red, and some executive somewhere said, I don't know what design systems are. We need to stop spending this much money on design systems. And so to conclude that story, what happened is we stopped work, and we partnered with our contact inside the organization to reach out to, I think, 12 different teams who had been using the system over that year. And we asked them, we said, you know that project that you did with the design system? Can you tell us roughly how long that would have taken you if you didn't have the system? So it wasn't perfect math, but we got some numbers back from them, and we compared that to the actual numbers. And what we learned is that for every dollar they spent on the design system, they saved $3 just in developer efficiency, right? So only in that one metric. And so we took that to leadership, and we said, here's the results, and they said, carry on. And actually today we're still working with that organization. That organization is Gap, and so every pair of jeans that you might buy on Gap.com or Banana Republic or Old Navy, they're all using that system, and that's sort of that's one of the things that helped drive me to like dig into this to better understand it. So this gives us kind of a way to think about stability over time, and it helps us to make something that actually can last. And that's something that I'm passionate about. In a world, especially in a digital world where things fade so quickly, I like to try and find ways to build things that will last. Okay, I know this has been a lot. I feel like I've just thrown so many diagrams at you, but I want to give you also just a few resources before I say goodbye. And so a few things. We mentioned the survey results. Those will be out. Our 5th year this year will be out in the next week or two. So you can use this link, and it will actually take you to the 2021 results. And that URL will change once we put the new site up. But again, you can just message me, and I'll make sure we let you know when those are live. We did a study recently just to prove that design systems actually can make you faster. And so this is a link, and I will post all of these on Twitter as well if you're, so you don't have to retype from your photos. But we just wanted to make sure that we could show mathematically that this can make things better. So we ran a study, and you can read about that here. We also developed what we call a design system calendar. So it's literally a Google Calendar you can subscribe to, and what it does is it just adds maybe once a week or so a little item to an all-day event on a Monday that just says, hey, have you thought about this lately? It might encourage you to go do some interviews with your subscribers, or to think about writing documentation at that token level or something like that. I wrote an article on selling design systems that I think is actually really important, just the idea of changing the way we speak about systems so that we can work with leadership to actually get money and get teams. So this article walks through sort of all the things that I've learned in doing that. Sparkbox does offer what we call a gap analysis, where we can help you find your position in that maturity and help you figure out and make a good plan to move forward. In addition to that, we've also developed what we call a maturity assessment, so you can do this yourself. So this is it's a survey you can take, and it helps you identify where in the maturity model you sit, and it gives you a lot of very customized advice on how to move forward in a good way. And then finally, I will just say that I would love to hear your feedback on this. It's sort of a baby for me, but we've been working on this for multiple years. If you have feedback, anything you want to share, please do so. And I just want to say thank you to my team, because none of this stuff we could do without all the folks on my team who are doing the work. You can see their smiling faces at sparkbox.com. I think we maybe have time for questions. Yes? Thank you all.
Thank you, Ben, for this inspiring presentation. As you imagine, we have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So first question, could this model help in case of the existences of multiple design systems, following multiple company mergers, for example?
So is the question about multiple systems inside of one organization?
Yeah, it's more about multiple design system with your model, if you can use this model with multiple design system.
I'm not sure I understand it. Can you maybe ask it in a different way?
Maybe the question is more today, imagine we use your model.
Yeah.
We have a different design system.
Yeah.
Is it possible to use your model for the different design system?
Once you already have a system, can you use the model? Is that the question? Yeah, the model and the anatomy both work to help you sort of assess what might be missing. So especially the anatomy, if you think about for all those layers and all those parts, you could look at any specific concern. So you could take color, and you could say, do we have foundational documentation about color? Do we have token information around color? Do we have assets? Do we have processes? Do we have documentation? So it sort of serves as a gap analysis in some way for you to like evaluate what could we spend time focusing on. I don't know if I answered the question well or not, but
yeah, no, it's
okay.
clear. Second question. It's more a technical question.
That's okay.
Do we need to have one design system per product or one design system for the whole company products?
Yeah, there is definitely, thank you for these questions, by the way. There is a trend for sure with design systems in a lot of the folks that I've spoken with, where they're focusing more on those fundamental layers. A lot of people are thinking, let's simplify our systems, right? I think we started simple, and then we thought the system could do more, and we grew these monsters of design systems, and then maintaining them became tremendously difficult. And so there is a movement to scale them back and to allow product teams to own subsystems that are an extension of that core system. And they own systems using the core stuff, but it's sort of their own product domain. And so they become the maintainers and owners of small systems that are unique to the things that they need. So that's there's definitely a movement in that direction for sure.
Oh, okay, it's clear. Would you recommend building a design system with your model for a small team of 2-3 designers?
Yeah, such good questions. Thank you for these. The decision of when or should you build one is critical. We try to think about, I have lots of interesting writings and things about when you should, because I actually don't believe every company needs a design system. Systems are a lot of work. They take a lot of time, and they show value only over years, right? This is not something that you can do in a few weeks and in a month see the value. It will literally take years to prove its value. And you will actually lose productivity first, and then you will finally, over time, start to see that come back to you. So it has to be seen as an investment. So the kinds of things that you would think about are, how many products do you need to support? If you have one product, you might not need a design system, right? If you have 20 products, a design system could really serve you well. If you have a situation where your market is not proven, you don't know, in the next 6 months, you don't know if your company will still be around, if your product will still be valuable. In those early stages of like a startup, it's risky to build a system. You should probably be spending more time talking to users than you should building a system, right? And then, the size of your teams would be another thing to think about. If there's other factors, I'm happy to discuss those, though, so find me later and we'll chat.
In your maturity stages and definition of design system, do you believe that all system categories, we talk about documentation, processes, etc., should be involved from stage 1?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, it's probably unrealistic to think that your system will have every layer and every part at the beginning. So I definitely encourage teams to start small, build something that you think will add value right away. Right, that's the key, that your first release needs to be, and this is why engaging with your subscribers is so important, because you shouldn't be guessing what is in your system. You should be talking to your product teams, finding the problems that they have, and solving those problems for them. Another thing you could do is if you have a large organization, I guarantee there are teams inside that company who are solving problems very systematically already, but it's just that the other teams don't know it. So part of your job could be just doing a little digging to find where are people already working systematically, and then how do we take that work and bring it and create something that can be used by multiple teams. In that way, you're building an advocate. The people who did that systematic work can become partners of the system team, and it takes less time because a lot of that work could already have been done. So the way a system starts, it's going to be very dependent on what your organization needs and what you've done so far.
Okay, how do you integrate the whole company in this work, and notably the CEO?
Ask it one more time.
How do you integrate the whole company in this work? When we talk about integrate the mature model, for example.
How do we integrate it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, a lot of our work is design system work now. So we help organizations who have products, and a lot of times we'll help them build a product, but we come alongside internal teams, and so it's about mentoring and training, and oftentimes it involves building a system and helping them hire for that design system team and write those job descriptions and train them. So this work integrates well because almost all of those engagements start with a discovery of some kind where we call it onboarding, where we just get to learn about them, and these are the models that we use to do that. So it's been helpful for us. It helps us to very quickly assess what the situation is, and then we can make some assumptions about, based on the history of conversations that we've had, we can make some assumptions about things that might be valuable for our clients very quickly.
Okay, last question. What
Yeah.
is the best design system you heard of?
This has changed over the years. I think right now the one that I am the most impressed with is Carbon, IBM's design system. The reason I think it's really good is because if you go look at Carbon, you'll realize there's actually a separate site, which is their design language site, which is really their brand in the form of like a website. And it covers everything. So it's talking about vehicle wraps, things that are printed on cars, billboards, office layout, and you'll see they have they call it, I think, their 2x2 grid. But I love this example because the same grid that they use to lay out an office is the grid they use to lay out a business card, is the grid they use to lay out digital work. And so there is a level of consistency that flows through that from the design language, from their brand, all the way into their digital products, so that you can see these pages that just scroll of all these different things that look different but feel the same. And I think that's the power of a system. So I think they've done a really good job of articulating all the why in that language site, and that filters into a really beautiful design system itself. So that's Carbon would be my choice.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Ben, thank you very much.
My pleasure.